Okay, to convert a passive system to active, one of the challenges is you can't just use your single stereo amplifier anymore. You need 4 channels of amplification. So you need 2 channels of amplification for your tweeter, and right and left, and you need 2 channels of amplification for your bass mid driver, right and left. And so 4 channels are needed. It means usually buying a second amplifier. But there's an easy, cheap way around this. What I found is in the automotive world, we have these 4-channel amplifiers that are readily available. And they're all cheap. They're 1600 watts, about 150 watts per channel at 8 ohms, I think. So that's plenty of power. And the reason, part of the reason why they're inexpensive is because there's no power supply. A normal amplifier that plugs into a 110 volt outlet in your house must be converted from 110 volts down to 40, 30, 20, or whatever voltage to run your amplifier circuits. These don't have the power supply, don't have the big transformer, and don't have the capacitors and the bridge diode network for converting that AC down to DC at whatever voltage. So it's less expensive. You get 4 channels for cheap money, and it's intended, of course, for the car. Well, you can buy a 30 amp power supply for 50 bucks, 60 bucks, something like that. So that's what I'm intending to do. This is going to go in the truck, and I'm going to go on my trip and see how it works. And then I'll take it home, and I'll put it in the house, and with my 30 amp power supply, and see how it works. Now, I have a 30 amp circuit fuse in the power leads that are going to drive this thing, and I'm not expecting to exceed 30 amps out of the truck. And if I did, I would probably have to get into big power to drive big bass speakers or something. You've got to get a more powerful alternator, and you're going to do all this work. But I'm not going crazy and running high volume, super crazy high volume. So a single amplifier run at a moderate volume is not going to draw more than 30 amps. So I think this power supply I'm purchasing will adequately supply sufficient power to drive this 4-channel amplifier. So that's what I'm going to try out. Up to a certain point, probably I could exceed the power supply if I really drive it just too hard, but I don't usually do that. So there's really cool things about these 4-channel amps. They have 4 channels. They're all matched. That's great. They have all these different options in here. You can filter them out in the controls you have at the back here. We're going to run them in stereo, so that's not an issue. Run them pretty straight. Tweeter in and right and left, and bass mid right and left. And I've got volume controls. I can turn off the filtering. There's a low pass filter in here, so you can run a sub amp. Run one as a sub amp and one as a full range. We're going to do is as biamp. Now, another thing we need for this is a crossover, and you saw in the active speakers that I had to build my own crossover using parts from Phil Marchand, and it was probably seemed complicated for some folks to do that. Well, you can buy electronic crossovers from one of my favorite companies here, Audio. Can you see that in the video? Audio Control makes these crossovers. This one I bought used online because it's a 24 dB per octave crossover, the 24XS. They don't make this, I don't believe, anymore. They make a third order one, an 18 dB per octave version that's in my truck now. So, but anyway, you've got an electronic crossover that will work very, very well. You also have high and low pass volume control, so you can adjust the tweeter volume against the bass mid volume to get that balanced right. That's the only issue you're going to have to take care of. It has this really cool speaker wave alignment for driver alignment, and I'll have to play with that. But anyway, this is a really nice way to go, right? Because you've got your crossover, which I can't find electronic crossovers for home audio hi-fi. So that's really cool that I can do this in the truck. This system with the 30 amp power supply, I can take this all into the house, set these up. This won't take very much power. This up to 30 amps is how much power I'll get, and then I'll exceed the power supply. I can't drive it too hard, but you might need something bigger than 30 amps to really drive it super hard. But I'm not planning on driving it that hard. So I get my active speaker system in 4-channel amp and crossover, and I can use it in the house for a $60 power supply. Because that's all an amplifier is. It's got a power supply, and then it has your amplifier channels. And this is just without the power supply. So you just buy a power supply for it that converts your AC down to 12 volts at whatever current it's going to drive. So I'm going to try that out. I'll have to maybe report back on how the 30 amp circuit, how the 30 amp power supply limit works out for me. But that's the plan, to drive my speakers, my four separate channels for the tweeter, separate channels for the bass mid with his amp. So that's the plan. And by the way, so if you wanted to build this whole project, in terms of cost, I know that cost is a limit for folks who have limited resources. You're talking, I don't think I paid $50 because you can buy really good drivers for $50 a piece. I know you can get really good, the CIS tweeters that are still available today, $50 a piece. This amplifier was about $100 or something, or maybe a little more, 110 something. And crossover, $89, $79 or something like that. Maybe it's $100, but it's in that range. So maybe you've got $100 in drivers and $200 another for $400. This is going to be a phenomenally clean, wonderful sounding system. This will be similar to the truck speaker system I built and put in the truck. That sounds wonderful, and that system, it only has the 6.5 drivers. You don't get as much bass. You have to push the bass a bit. These will sound wonderful. If I were doing this over again, I would buy those same bass mid drivers I used in the active speaker system for $50. Those are wonderful. So if you're to do that, buy those same drivers I bought, the CIS tweeters and the Hi-Vi bass mid drivers. That would be a great option. Okay, folks, here's the system all put together with the Boss amplifier, and I have the power supply. We'll take a closer look at that, and the other crossover that I own, the other audio control. It's the third order instead of fourth order, but it works perfectly fine. This is a complete system now in active arrangement instead of passive, and they are much cleaner. So, but I also have learned, as I have learned over many years now, that everything matters, that with every step along the way, the quality of the component that you use makes a difference to the quality of the sound. It kind of makes sense, right? But and some components matter more than others. The drivers matter a great deal. The source sound makes a great deal of difference. Some sources are less quality than others. So for my test, what I've done here in that regard is to start with my very high, it's not huge money, but it's this Rotel CD player that I bought a number of years ago, but it has wonderfully clean sound. And I'm using my control amplifier, the old one, the old Rotel, that is also, it's 25 years old, but it works very well. Not a lot of big difference in control amplifiers. It's just a switching device, so not a big deal there. And then I started actually to test these speakers out with the other crossover. If you go to my active speakers project, I have a two-way crossover I built from Metasound, and I went through that. Actually went through my old Rotel, those Rotel amplifiers for that active system into the original 8-inch two-way the ones that I built for in the active speakers project, started there and then switched over to this Boss amplifier to test this amplifier out with those old speakers against my very much more expensive Rotel amplifiers, and I found this Boss amplifier for $100. Again, there's no power supply. You have to supply that power supply, which I have, I'll show you, for $55. It was a lot of money for a 30 amp supply for this thing. I haven't been able to blow that, by the way, overdrive it, but this Boss amp performs quite well. Yes, there is a slight degradation in quality of sound. Everything matters. But for $100 against, I think those two Rotel amplifiers to replace those is $500 a piece anyway. So $1,000 worth of amplifier versus 100, and with no power supply, so let's say 150. Really remarkable how well that Boss amp works. So that's the first thing you always want to know. I'm suggesting this active two-way system, and I have to really sort of take responsibility and say, are these components really high quality? And so this Boss amp certainly does perform well. Let me zoom in and show you the other components here. Take a closer look at those. So this is the setup with the Boss amp, and again, I'm using this audio control. It is the third order one that is available. The one that I showed you earlier in the video, the 24 dB per octave one, is not available. You can get it on eBay, at least I found one. So works very well. I found setting volumes here and against volumes here for a given room volume, you can drive these a little harder and drive this less hard, and I get the tone characteristics change with how hard you drive this amplifier with this and so forth. But so you can balance the system out here, you can balance it here. I'm kind of doing a little bit of both. And then again, for this amp, being that it has no power supply, you have to supply the power to it. And so I'm using this. It is purchased from Parts Express. It was about $50, $60. It's a 30 amp supply, 12 volt. It does have an adjustment on, a little adjuster inside to adjust the voltage. You get a voltmeter on there, make sure you're in the 12, 13 volt range. Obviously you can drive this thing up to 14 volts without problem, because the auto system will drive this thing up to 14 volts, your charging system in your vehicle. So that's what it's designed for. So amplifier performs quite well. Crossover, when I bypassed this crossover, I went to my Phil Marchand homemade crossover with the 4th order networks. That was cleaner. You could hear that difference. So this is a step down. But anyway, for the money we're talking here, for an 8-inch 2A, you could go to a satellite. You would then filter this out, filter the bass. This is a switch here for high pass. So this is the bass mid input. This channel operating bass mid. You could turn on the filter here, turn this switch over, so it eliminates all the frequencies from an adjustable range, say in a 100 cycle range, and add a sub to this system. So that would be the other way around. Apologize, the lighting isn't very good back here, but if you see basically what have we done, we have your A and B, or channel 1 and 2 is really what this is, and channel 3 and 4. So for sake of not getting too confused, I use 1 and 2 always for the tweeters, and 3 and 4 for the bass mid drivers. And so this mid and tweeters for one channel, this is for the other channel. And so you try to keep that straight. And then of course, plus minus, I actually got that confused, thinking pluses are on the end. Some of these amps have the pluses on the end and the minuses in the middle, but this is plus minus, be sure to get that correct. Plus minus for the bass drivers. And then of course you have to remember for this channel 1 and 2, which is on this side here, is for the tweeters. So 1 and 2 is always tweeters, 3 and 4 is bass. And then power is very easy. This has a lead, a little jumper I put across here. Your radio will, most radios will have a plus 12 volt plus line coming out that powers this line when you turn the radio on. And so this amp would shut off when you turn the truck off or car off. And then when you turn it on, the power from the radio turns on, and then it sends that 12 volt signal to this. You hook it up here, and that will turn this amplifier on and off. That's how it comes on and off. And then you need some heavy wire. And then here you have your line going in to the N and L, and it doesn't matter because it's AC, so phasing is not irrelevant in AC, in the AC world. And then you have 3 connectors for plus and 3 connectors for minus. And so I'm using white for plus and black for minus. I know that's backwards compared to house wiring and all that. House wiring, black is always plus, but in any case, I'm used to electronics where red is plus, black is minus. So I'm using the white wire. I actually stole this wire from an extension cable. Just cut it and took the wire. I wanted heavy wire. You can buy heavy wire. And some 12 gauge or something. And so plus, you got 3 pluses, so you can connect your plus up here, connect your minus, and then plus and minus again going to my crossover, which is off camera. So that's pretty much it. So that's pretty much the full review of my 8-inch 2A system going active and on a budget. And it works pretty well. I'm quite happy with this system. If this is all I had, I wouldn't be complaining. I would be quite happy with these. So I'll enjoy these upstairs for many years to come.